Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let's now shift our focus to the BRICS Summit in Johannesburg. On the second day of the 15th BRICS Summit in the South African capital, Prime Minister Narendra Modi held a bilateral meeting with the host, the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. The two leaders reviewed the progress made in bilateral ties, exchanged views on regional and multilateral issues, and also on ways to work jointly to strengthen the voice of the Global South. Prime Minister's office issued a press release saying, and I quote, both leaders reviewed the progress made in bilateral relations and expressed satisfaction at the progress achieved in various fields, including defense, agriculture, trade and investment, health, conservation and people-to-people ties. Prime Minister Modi and President Ramaphosa also exchanged views on continued coordination in multilateral bodies and regional and multilateral issues of mutual interest. Ramaphosa expressed full support for India's G20 presidency and appreciated India's initiative for giving the African Union full membership of the G20. The South African president conveyed that he looked forward to visiting New Delhi for the G20 summit. Significantly, Prime Minister Modi has said India fully supports the expansion of BRICS and welcomes any step to move forward on this based on a consensus. There has been an ongoing debate on whether BRICS, that currently comprises only 5 nations, should have an expansion. Prime Minister Modi is also scheduled to attend several open and closed plenary sessions in Johannesburg, which will be followed by a banquet dinner hosted by President Ramaphosa. The opening day of the BRICS Summit was witness to the BRICS Business Forum Leaders Dialogue. In his address at this forum, Prime Minister Modi said India would soon be a $5 trillion economy and in the coming years it would emerge as the growth engine of the world. Russian President Vladimir Putin is conspicuous by his absence from the BRICS Summit. This comes amidst his growing global isolation following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Interestingly, Chinese President Xi Jinping, who withdrew from this particular dialogue at the last minute, conveyed through a speech that was read out by someone else that hegemonism is not in China's DNA, a statement most will find hard to digest. The statement read, the talks taking place in Johannesburg are not aimed at asking countries to take sides or create bloc confrontation, but rather to expand the architect of peace and development. Whatever resistance there may be, BRICS is a positive and stable force for goodwill and it will continue to grow. We will forge a stronger BRICS strategic partnership, actively advance membership expansion. That's what he said. Now, he said we will make the international order more just and equitable. China, remember, is the strongest proponent of BRICS expansion. US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has said we don't see BRICS as a rival to the US. So the question we're asking is, can BRICS indeed emerge as a rival to G7? Is there merit in the argument that China wants to bring in its own allies into the BRICS fold in order to expand its own influence and leverage within the group? Just what does the future of BRICS look like?
कंटीजेंसी रिजर्व अरेंजमेंट्स के माध्यम से हमने फाइनेंशियल सेफ्टी नेट का निर्माण किया है। ब्रिक्स सैटेलाइट, कॉन्स्टलेशन, वैक्सीन R&D सेंटर, फार्मा उत्पादों को पारंपरिक मान्यता जैसी पहलों से हम ब्रिक्स देशों के आम नागरिकों के जीवन में सकारात्मक बदलाव ला रहे हैं। यूथ समिट, ब्रिक्स गेम्स, थिंक टैंक काउंसिल जैसे इनिशिएटिव से हम सभी देशों के बीच पीपल टू पीपल टाइज मजबूत कर रहे हैं। ब्रिक्स एजेंडा को नई दिशा देने के लिए भारत ने रेलवे रिसर्च नेटवर्क, MSMEs के बीच करीबी सहयोग, ऑनलाइन ब्रिक्स डेटाबेस, स्टार्टअप फोरम जैसे कुछ सुझाव रखे थे। मुझे खुशी है कि इन विषयों पर उल्लेखनीय प्रगति हुई है।
The world has entered a new period of turbulence, and you call upon BRICS to play an important role, notwithstanding this turbulence that the world is going through, and that the BRICS family should remain united but more importantly should be ready to play a key role in helping to stabilize the world. And you mentioned a very important point about development, that it is not a privilege of a few. Development should be spread around so that all can benefit. And you mentioned a number of areas in which there should be development: in science, technological advancement, in innovation. And we thank you also for the offer to set up a BRICS remote data center that will help to advance the technological and innovative capability of BRICS countries.
All right. So, what's happened at the BRICS Summit so far? To understand that, let's now go across to our panel of guests. Joining me live from Johannesburg is senior journalist Manish Chand. Manish, welcome to Global Lens. We're also joined by Ambassador Shashank, former Foreign Secretary of India. Always great having you on the show, sir. And completing the panel tonight is Ramakrishnan Sridharan, consulting editor with News9. Welcome, Shri. All right, Manish, let me start with you since you are closely tracking the summit in Johannesburg. Tell us what have been the big takeaways so far. Has a communique been issued yet? And there's been a lot of talk about expansion of BRICS. Prime Minister Modi has said India fully supports it. Any forward movement on that front?
Neha, thanks for inviting me to the program. I think the big message coming out from Johannesburg is that BRICS, as we know it, is poised for a major transformation. BRICS is going to expand, and although there were some niggling doubts before the Johannesburg summit, but now we've heard leaders speak in the plenary session, all 5 of them, including, of course, Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And they're all agreed, they all spoke in unison that BRICS needs to expand to reflect new realities, to accommodate aspirations of the global south. So what is happening here, latest reports, latest information suggests, what we know, is that last night they had a retreat here. The leaders had a retreat session where the expansion of BRICS figured very prominently. And in the morning tomorrow, the leaders had a closed-door session as well as an open plenary session. Now, in the open plenary session, Mr. President Ramaphosa, South African president, spoke about the new BRICS in the making. Brazilian president also, Brazil was, by the way, a bit skeptical about BRICS expansion. And he had, in fact, said that, the idea is to have more members, but BRICS should not become the Tower of Babel, in his words. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, there was a lot of people asked me here the question as well, is India supporting expansion? So now he has cleared doubts about that by openly declaring that India fully supports. Now the next stage in expansion is where they are consensus that the BRICS will expand, but the criteria, the precise criteria which will form the basis of expansion still remain under discussion. From what I understand, gather from my sources, right now there is a kind of consensus over 3 or 4 criteria. Number one, any new BRICS member should be an emerging economy. This is very important so that the BRICS identity as a grouping of emerging powers is not diluted. Number 2, the minimum GDP of any aspiring BRICS member potential candidate should be at least $400 billion GDP. The third is that no aspiring member should have sanctions against them. So, but if we go by this criteria, probably in the first round of expansion, Iran is excluded. So these are some of the criteria which have been largely agreed, but I don't think they have been unveiled or made public. We don't have a joint communique yet. Joint communique will be probably issued tomorrow after the BRICS outreach meeting, which is very important because here you have more than 40 leaders from African countries, countries of the global south who will also participate in it.
Thank you for that comprehensive report from Johannesburg. Manish, of course, the joint communique is something that we will track with you. It's interesting. You say that most seem to support, in principle, the idea of a BRICS expansion, but certainly it will be much harder to evolve a consensus when it comes to actually deciding on which countries should be included in the BRICS fold. I think that is going to be the bigger challenge. But before I let you go, Manish, I can't help but ask you this question. There was the BRICS Business Forum Leaders Dialogue yesterday, where the Prime Minister of India spoke. What happened to the Chinese President? Xi Jinping suddenly vanished into thin air. He was supposed to deliver an address, which was ultimately read out by someone else on his behalf. Many have been wondering, did his disappearance signal some sort of tension or differences? What exactly happened? What's the inside scoop?
So I think that would be reading too much. Yes, it was a surprise. It remains a big mystery. It remains a talking point here, that Xi Jinping coming all the way. And in fact, in the morning, he had a meeting with President Ramaphosa, a bilateral meeting, where both the leaders held a joint press conference. Speculation can go on, but my sense is that because he did participate in the retreat after that, so my sense is that it could be possibly fatigue. One would like to speculate that it was some sort of signaling, but I don't have any hard evidence to suggest because he participated.
It's very difficult to say what might be going through Xi Jinping's head, but it was certainly a curious development that he chose to make a disappearance like that, especially considering that he is actually on a state visit to South Africa. But on that note, Manish Chand, thank you so much for joining us with that live report from Johannesburg. We hope to come back to you tomorrow for more on the BRICS Summit. Thank you. Let me now go across to Ambassador Shashank. Sir, let me ask you a couple of quick questions. It's very interesting. The US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says we don't see BRICS as a rival to the United States. The question many are asking is, can BRICS emerge as a rival to G7? One. Two, the Prime Minister of India has put to rest a lot of speculation by saying we fully support BRICS expansion. However, wouldn't it be correct to say that India still has its concerns? India would not want BRICS to become another SCO. It would not want China to bring in its own allies into the fold and turn it into a China-centric or an anti-West bloc.
Well, what I would say is that USA perhaps felt that China or Russia could not be a competitor for them. Perhaps some people in the US might be saying that BRICS might become a competitor to the United States if de-dollarization is promised and proceeds ahead under some kind of a BRICS plan for use of local or national currencies and then going for a reserve currency on behalf of BRICS. That could be one aspect. The other one, of course, is that India does not see BRICS as a rival to either the United States or the G7. It is a question for the analysts to find out that G7 has a certain amount of population, composition of the countries, members, also has the GDP and the per capita GDP. In the case of the present BRICS members, I think already the population is larger than G7 and the contribution to the global GDP is about the same, which is likely to increase way ahead of the G7 in case BRICS is expanded or if the plans that India and other countries have, even if China does not remain a laggard, that they might be able to go beyond by 10% of the G7 contribution to the global GDP. That is number one. Second part is regarding what your question is. India appeared to be a bit of a, let's say, cautious on the question of expansion. I think India was trying to take a consensus view, wanted to have a position in concert with Brazil, which will take into account that we don't want BRICS to become a rival to anyone else. We want this to be a voice for the global south, for the emerging countries, and especially The bases were on two sides. One was the IPSA, India, Brazil, South Africa. There were three important members which were trying to promote democracy in the global south and go ahead on that basis. The second one was RIC. That was the multilateral issues, both economic and reforms of the international institutions, where Russia, India, and China were consulting each other. Now, BRICS was formed based on the proposal from O'Neill, who later on became the Treasury Secretary of UK. At that time was the Goldman Sachs. So he felt that, well, this will make a big difference how these countries, BRIC, he was saying, that how they conduct their economic policies. India cannot be against the expansion because, the countries which are interested, they're all friends of India. So for anybody to say that India will consider its friends coming into BRICS being something that they will now leave India's friendship and become China's friends, I doubt that very much. I thought the question was more about the effectiveness of the organization. And therefore, India wanted to be a bit cautious. But now we have gone along with the basic concept of expansion. The question remains the criteria, the speed, and what kind of a participation we need from the other members. And then there are technical questions remain that, the more the number of countries, then you have to consider everyone's convenience in hosting the meetings in future.
All right. Shri, let me bring you in. Of course, Ambassador Shashank is right in saying that effectiveness of the forum is always critical. But I guess this time around, the focus has largely been on expansion, which according to some has also been controversial. Now, the question is, as has been pointed out by the ambassador, what criteria are going to be adopted for expansion? Now, it has been said that it will be emerging economies, it will be developing economies. But like I said earlier, there is this nagging concern that does China want to bring on board countries that are primarily pro-Beijing, to expand its own influence and leverage within the forum, as it seems to be doing in other parts of the world? And, does it also want to emerge as the leader of the global south, a position that India has already laid claim to? Is that a legitimate concern for India and others to have?
So, Neha, Ambassador Shashank is a career diplomat. He's trained to measure his words, whereas I am a poor journalist who's supposed to, say provocative things. So let me say that the kind of countries that will be let into BRICS will be friends of China and Russia, by and large. Okay, so let us not forget history, Neha. China has always called itself Zhongguo. Zhongguo means Middle Kingdom, right? So China has always seen itself as the center of the world in some sense. And whether it is Mao Zedong or whether it is Mr. Xi Jinping, China's stated ambition is to change the governance system of the world in line with Beijing's principles and values. So that pretty much influences everything that China does on the foreign policy stage. But like someone said recently beautifully, geopolitical catastrophes often occur at the intersection of ambition and desperation. While China does not lack ambition, it is now put in a position of desperation largely because of the isolation that it is now facing, especially from the West. So, China is trying to assert itself. It is trying to demand that it be treated on par with, let's say, the US, obviously the second largest economy. But I think the way in which China is going about it is where the clashes and the resentment are happening. For example, let's talk about India. Now, we are fighting on the borders with China. China wants Indians who are applying from Arunachal Pradesh to get a separate visa on their passport before they can come into China. I mean, this is ridiculous. This is not how you establish a friendly relationship or expect people to cooperate with you on agendas that are important to you, Neha. So I don't think India will accept any kind of a membership into BRICS, which does not align with India's values and aligns with India's notions of what it takes to lead a body like BRICS. It's very clear. We don't want to be an anti-Western bloc, which both China and Russia are very keen to do that. They are still talking in terms of Cold War era. The language is still very much us versus them. Whereas under Prime Minister Modi, that is not the case. This is about India first. And India will align with any country that wants to progress along with India to make the world a more prosperous and a more peaceful place. So, Neha, I think this is BRICS will have a difficult road ahead, according to my mind. India will play its cards very cautiously. That's what my reading is, going by what Prime Minister Modi has said at the BRICS Summit, Neha.
I agree, Shri. You know, China and Russia versus the West is the new global reality. And I really wonder if this is going to emerge as a major challenge for India as the host of the G20 summit next month. But coming back to BRICS, and I have to say this to my two guests, because I'm a journalist, I'm not a diplomat, I can afford to be undiplomatic rather. When I read that Xi Jinping said in his statement that hegemonism is not in China's DNA, I laughed out loud. But on a more serious note, Ambassador Shashank, the question that I want to ask you is this. Isn't, there a legitimate concern, whether on part of India or Brazil, that China and Russia probably want not just greater leverage within an expanded BRICS, but they probably are looking to turn it into yet another anti-West forum? Forget about the G7. Look at the example of the SCO. Isn't that how the SCO has gone with all the expansions that have happened over the years? And therefore, the worry is that, will BRICS end up like another SCO? That will not be in India's interests at all.
Well, we are thinking of China's hegemonism. Brazil should be more worried about the US hegemonism, which has had a Monroe Doctrine for more than 200 years. As far as China is concerned, it may be Chinese hegemonism from its point of view, but what we have to see that other countries have seen through the Chinese loans which have been converted into equity. That means debt converted into equity and possession of various strategic assets in different countries. I don't think it's very much liked by those countries, even though they have been giving their highest awards to China. So therefore, India can definitely see that out of the 5 members of BRICS, at least 3 of them are emerging developing countries. And I'm quite sure that they would do everything possible to protect the interests of the global South in this regard. Secondly, they would not like any kind of game of hegemonism to be played out through BRICS. SCO is a totally different kind of an organization which was set up by China to rival the influence of Russia in Central Asia. And India was interested in joining that organization in order to curb terrorism emanating from Pakistan and its neighboring regions. Therefore, Russia had proposed India's membership of SCO. China insisted that Pakistan should be there.
Exactly.
Ultimately, India was advised by Russia that, okay, both of you should be there, then you can put pressure on Pakistan to curb terrorism to the extent, and then take care of your own interests within the country. So anyway, so that is the reason, because many of the Central Asian countries themselves are suffering from terrorism. And as you know, that this is an issue which affects right now practically the whole of the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. When the ISIS is thinking in terms of setting up its nodules in Khorasan in Asia, and they feel that democratic countries like India are soft targets. So therefore, I'm quite sure that China has its own feelings about the ISIS kind of organizations which try to promote only the Sharia laws. I don't think that will be very acceptable to China. So there might be international issues on which China, Russia, and India may be also on the same page. Therefore, we have to keep in mind that these developing countries initially they were enthusiastic in getting money from China and also getting whatever help they could get, weaponry, etc. from Russia. Now, Russia can no longer supply to them. India can supply to them. The Indian national currency settlements is a great example for all of them. Many of them are trying to go bilaterally with India on this route. I think so. Therefore, we have to keep all that in mind. Chinese currency is very strong in many ways. And if Chinese are going to put their money as the part of the reserve currency of BRICS, that's a completely different issue. So we should not rule out what the BRICS will think or expanded BRICS will think. We have to protect the interests, and those will continue to protect.
It's economic imperialism, isn't it? And also the irony, as far as SEO is concerned, is it was founded as an organization that would address the issue of terror, and then China goes ahead and includes a country that is clearly the fountainhead of terrorism, at least in our part of the world, namely Pakistan. All right, we're out of time, but Shri, I'll give you the last word very quickly. De-dollarization is something that's being talked about a lot in the context of the BRICS Summit. Is that on the agenda? Clearly, there's not going to be a common currency for trade amongst these 5 countries, but are we likely to see forward movement as far as trading in local currencies of the 5 countries is concerned? Very quickly, Shri.
Well, Neha, very quickly, there might be sporadic exchanges that happen in local currencies, but do I see dollar getting dethroned as the default currency of the world? Absolutely not. The European Union tried very hard to create euro as a default, as a challenger for the US dollar, and we've seen what happened. US dollar is still the global reserve currency, and every time there's any uncertainty in the world, people rush to buy dollars. Why? Simply because of the safety and the size of the economy that the US has, and the credibility of the system that it has, which makes this a safe bet. So I don't think we are looking at a scenario where dollar is going to be dethroned, Neha. Yes, okay. Dollar may lose a little bit of share, but I think it's going to remain the reserve currency for a very, very long time.
So de-dollarization may be a pipe dream. On that note, Ambassador Shashank and Shri, thank you so much for joining me on the show and sharing your perspective with us. As always, a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much. All right, my director tells me I'm completely out of time. So it's a wrap on Global Lens. Thanks for watching.